April 10, 2023. In a single night, 18,000 dairy cows were wiped out in Texas, the deadliest barn fire in U.S. history. It shattered families and sent shockwaves straight to the governor's office. What seemed like one catastrophic accident exposed deep cracks threatening America's dairy heartland, a state suddenly facing political panic and a nation watching its farms vanish. This is how one disaster spiraled into a wake-up call for the entire industry. What went so wrong, and just how much worse could it get? Smoke poured from the barns outside Dimmitt before anyone could process what was happening. Inside South Fork Dairy, a worker fought to steer a manure vacuum truck out of the building, its engine already burning. 2 fire extinguishers emptied, but nothing stopped the flames. Methane built up from thousands of cows, and tons of manure ignited in a flash, turning the barn into an inferno. In minutes, the air filled with the sound of animals in panic and the roar of collapsing steel. 18,000 cattle died before sunrise. The fire's heat was so intense that rescue crews could only reach one critically injured worker, pulled from the wreckage alive, but barely. This was no ordinary barn. It was part of a facility authorized to more than double its herd, from 11,500 cows to nearly 24,000. On the night of the fire, nearly 18,000 animals were packed inside a single complex, each one adding to the fuel load and the risk. Investigators traced the cause to the manure vacuum truck, an engine fire in a building thick with methane and flammable bedding. The explosion that followed was the deadliest cattle barn fire ever recorded in the United States, wiping out roughly 3% of Texas's entire dairy herd in a single night. For the worker who survived, and the families who depended on those cows, the scale of loss was almost impossible to grasp. The disaster exposed the dangers built into the very design of modern mega-dairies, where industrial concentration means that one spark can erase years of work and millions of pounds of milk production overnight. Governor Greg Abbott's office faced a new kind of pressure as word of the Dimmitt catastrophe spread. Calls poured in from industry groups, national reporters, and anxious producers. Texas had just lost nearly 3% of its dairy herd in a single night, and the numbers behind the headlines painted a stark picture. Across the country, the dairy sector was in retreat. The U.S. counted only 24,811 licensed herds in 2024, down 6% from the year before. Projections showed another 2,800 farms set to disappear in 2025. Half of America's dairies have vanished since 2013, and by 2035, only 12,000 are expected to remain. Yet Texas, now ranked 3rd in milk production, was both a powerhouse and a warning sign. The state produced over 17 billion pounds of milk in 2024, with 675,000 cows on record, more than ever before. But the consolidation was relentless. 70% of all U.S. milk now comes from just 5% of the nation's dairies. In Texas, the number of licensed dairies dropped from 294 to 284 in a single year. 3/4 of the state's milk is produced in the Panhandle, where mega farms dominate the landscape. Industry leaders urged the governor to address the vulnerabilities exposed by the fire, the risks of concentration, the threat to rural jobs, and the growing divide between industrial-scale operations and family farms. Every new closure or disaster carried consequences that rippled far beyond Texas, testing the limits of policy and the future of American milk. March 2024 brought a new kind of threat to Texas dairies, one that could not be fought with fire hoses or insurance claims. Laboratory results from a Panhandle herd confirmed the presence of H5N1 avian influenza in dairy cattle, the first time this virus had ever been detected in cows in the United States. Within days, state and federal veterinarians traced the spread to multiple herds across the region. The virus, normally associated with wild birds and poultry, had jumped species. Early signs in affected cows were subtle: a sudden drop in milk production, thickened milk, and animals that appeared only mildly ill. Yet genetic sequencing left no doubt about the diagnosis, and the implications for the entire industry were immediate. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention issued an alert after a Texas dairy worker developed conjunctivitis linked to exposure from infected cows. This was the first documented case of avian influenza passing from cattle to a human. While most herds showed only limited symptoms, about 10% of those infected experienced visible illness. Some operations in the Panhandle took the drastic step of culling lactating cows to contain the outbreak. Federal orders soon required testing before any interstate movement of cattle, and new surveillance rules reshaped daily routines on Texas farms. Veterinarians and public health officials scrambled to understand how the virus had entered the dairy supply chain. Investigations pointed to a single spillover event from wild birds into Texas cattle in late 2023, followed by rapid spread through animal movement and shared equipment. The industry faced a biosecurity reckoning. Disinfectant protocols tightened. Visitor access was restricted. Milk from affected herds had to be dumped, and the fate of hundreds of workers hung in the balance as the outbreak's economic toll became clear. Even as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention assured the public that pasteurized milk remained safe, uncertainty lingered over the long-term risks to herds, workers, and the nation's food supply. Milk prices that once hovered near $24 per hundredweight in 2022 tumbled to under $19 per hundredweight in 2023. They saw only a slight recovery to $20.55 per hundredweight in 2025, still well below what most farms need to break even. The numbers on a typical 300-cow family dairy ledger tell the story. Where a modest profit once stood, now sits a loss that can reach $60,000 in a single year. Feed, fuel, and replacement heifer costs have all climbed, with young cows jumping from $1,750 to $2,600 apiece. Cheese prices have lagged even further behind, and the margin between what farmers are paid and what it costs to produce milk has collapsed. On average, producers now keep just 25 cents of every dollar spent at the grocery store. Mid-sized dairies, those with 200 to 999 cows, are disappearing the fastest. They are down 72% over the last decade. The numbers favor scale. A mega-dairy with over 2,000 cows can produce milk at about $23 per hundredweight, while smaller herds face costs close to $33 per hundredweight. That is a $27,000 annual disadvantage for a small operator, even before factoring in price swings or unexpected disasters. Many families are forced to choose between expanding, finding a niche, or closing the barn for good. But even the largest dairies depend on a workforce that is growing more uncertain every season. Nearly 4 out of 5 gallons of American milk are produced by immigrant hands. In Texas, about half the dairy workforce is estimated to be undocumented. After a series of immigration enforcement actions in 2025, up to 70% of workers simply stopped showing up. Texas Agriculture Commissioner Sid Miller called the dairy sector the hardest hit, warning that losing this workforce could spike retail prices by more than 90%. Producers now face a labor gap that threatens not just their bottom line, but the entire supply chain. For many, the math no longer adds up, and the future of family dairies hangs in the balance. Water once seemed limitless beneath the Texas Panhandle, but the Ogallala Aquifer has dropped 44 feet since the 1950s. Hydrologists warn that more than 70% of this vital water source could become unusable within 2 decades if current pumping continues. The aquifer now recharges at just half an inch per year, far slower than the rate at which it is being drained for cattle and crops. Across West Texas, Over 60% of wells have already fallen below the level needed for pumps to draw water. In 2024 alone, 200 counties imposed new water use restrictions, signaling a future where dairies may have nothing left to tap. Leon Statz, a dairy farmer from Wisconsin, left behind a note that read, "I wish I never sold my cows. I'm a dairy farmer." His story echoes across the country, where farmers face a suicide rate 3.5 times higher than average. Male farmers die by suicide at a rate of 52.1 per 100,000. As stress deepens, families are forced to choose. They can expand into mega-dairies, carve out a niche, or walk away. New processing plants and $7 billion in investments offer hope, but only about half of U.S. farms are expected to turn a profit this year. Legislation like the Whole Milk for Healthy Kids Act may help, but for many, the next decision is the hardest one yet. Today, half of America's dairy farms are gone, and 70% of our milk comes from just 5% of operations. The choices made now about water, labor, and survival will shape what is left on our tables tomorrow. The future of food is not distant. It is already underway. What do you think?